Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here this morning. I thought it was a lot of management issues at EPA, which has been discussed, and I know there's a lot more of oversight from basically John Bill to Pebble Mine to employees not being fired for watching pornography, all these other issues we could go in. But I'm going to really take another step and continue, take my 5 minutes and sort of continue some of the conversations just had, but from a different perspective, from Northeast Georgia perspective. Yep. About the Clean Water Act and affecting the waters of the United States. The rule would vastly expand EPA's regulatory jurisdiction and in turn would impede businesses and families in Georgia's 9th Congressional District and across the country. If this rule is allowed to go into effect, basically dry ditches, rainwater runoffs, low-lying areas, and seemingly any area that would hold water would be subject to EPA's jurisdiction. This would force Northeast Georgia's cattle ranchers to move their herds, chicken farmers to move their chicken houses, and average citizens to consult EPA for permission to build on their land. Actually, it takes it a step further, and I think this is the concern that I have, in not just the production being done now, but in many of my areas, my farmers, my grandparents who dairy farm, some of this, and I know there's an example just down the road from where I live, where a gentleman has 100 acres of land. Most of it grew up in dry gulches like we most know, but under these kind of rules basically would make his land unsellable because of this process. And this is a very real concern to what we have. So do you really, just question, Administrator, do you have a dollar value on the impact this proposed rule would have? Any kind of a guess?
Actually, I do not believe there was an economic analysis associated with this because it's a jurisdictional question. But I would point out, and I'm happy to have further conversations in Georgia about this. We have done, I think, a very good job at trying to not just recognize the exemptions that exist in the Clean Water Act relative to agriculture, but to try to expand those in this, and to not write this in a way that would expand the jurisdiction of the Clean Water Act, and in fact try to make that narrower on the basis of real science. So I do think there's a large gap between our intent and I think how we wrote it and how it's being perceived, and EPA has a big job to do to close that gap.
Well, and I think what you've stated here is the dialogue that goes on that I have all the time with our constituents that I've been facing myself. And I think it goes back also to an issue here of, and you talked about a cost and not it's a jurisdictional issue, not a cost issue. Well, I think that's the problem that we're having right now, is that there's regulation after regulation or jurisdictional fights, whatever you want to call it. But the bottom line is it affects the taxpayers. It affects the people who fund the government, who want to say, why is government so affecting in my life, especially in areas in which they, frankly, and for some of our, even given some of the Supreme Court rulings, there is an overreach here. I do believe there is a balance between carrying out your role as an administrator and then also balancing the intent of Congress. And I think it goes to Congress being not very good at giving you direction.
I appreciate your concerns, and the more that we could actually talk and even meet with your constituents to understand where it feels like two ships passing in the night, and I need to bring those together, and we have to have a better understanding. And I am entirely open to comment on this. That's why we extended the comment.
I got a couple of quick questions in that I need to I would like to get in. Under the proposed rule, it's understood that farmers will only qualify for Section 404 exemptions if they meet National Resources Conservation NRSCS standards that are currently optional. Yes or no? Is that true or false?
No, it's not.
It is false. Okay. Under current law, would a farmer be required to the NRCS compliant in order to be exempted?
No.
Would they have to currently? So no. If a farmer or rancher has questions on how this rule would affect their property or operation, how does the EPA respond to these questions?
We work collaboratively, usually with USDA and the farmer, to understand what their concerns are and to address them so they can continue to farm appropriately.
What's the average response time?
Oh, I don't have an answer to that, sir.
If the EPA, if you don't respond in a timely manner, is that farmer or rancher protected from fines or punitive actions by the EPA if they're not in compliance?
Could I just clarify one thing? EPA is often not the permitting entity here, so it's very often a State or Army Corps. So,
well, I think that you've hit something for me perfectly. I believe this is more of a State issue and not a national EPA issue. We have just probably a fundamental difference in national. In fact, EPA exposure and that states are doing some of this. And I think you perfectly hit it for me, and but we just honestly disagree.
I actually don't think we have any disagreement philosophically or hopefully in how we do this rule.
Except maybe in the fact that I don't believe your position should even exist. I think the states
well, that
can
may
do
be
it
a
now.
difference between
Now we'll have an interesting issue. But I just want you to know
it might be a fundamental difference.
that is a fundamental difference at that point. But I've already commented in opposition to this proposed rule. I know that many in Georgia in my district are. But I have one quick question, and maybe clarify this for me. In your conversation with my good colleague, Ms. Spear, just a moment ago, did I hear you say that you went to the CIA first?
No, I never talked to the CIA about anything. Not directly, no.
Okay. I believe I heard you say that when in discussion on the bill that you went to the CIA first.
No, what I indicated was I went to our office that deals with our human resource issues. They actually brought in our Office of General Counsel. They referred this to our Homeland Security Office, which is the liaison with the intelligence community. They actually communicated with the CIA in seeking verification of whether or not John Beale worked for them in some way and under what circumstances that occurred.
Just wanted to make sure for the record that I heard you correctly. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Could I just answer one question? I want to make sure.
The time has expired, but yes, you can answer.
I just want to clarify. When we were talking about the Clean Water Act exemptions, I want to make sure that I understood your questions, because the Clean Water Act exemptions clearly indicate where there is agricultural exemptions. The additional work that we tried to do with USDA to identify other work that was exempted, as long as it's conservation efforts working with USDA, was in addition to those exemptions. And I just wanted to make sure I answered you correctly.
And I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, if I can have just a moment, because this is the problem. And it exists because you have people who have real issues and real problems that and they're not transparent. They see EPA from state level or national level. They can't get the answers. And I think this is the problem that develops around this whole thing, that we forget the end result is not about a building up here in Washington that turns out rules. It's about the people that get up every day and want to have their own way to do their living and make their life, and do so without as least interference in the way they can. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate it.
I also understand that there was an economic analysis done with this rule, so I apologize. We'll get that to you.
Okay, the time is expired. I thank the gentleman from Georgia.